indie gaming certainly seems to be getting bigger these days, which is somewhat ironic considering most indie games are still relatively small and unassuming. This is certainly the case with the latest offering from developer WildSphere, as it hasn't exactly been heavily promoted, but does that mean it should just be overlooked, or is Timothy vs. the Aliens worthy of more attention? As the title suggests, this game finds you playing as the titular Timothy as he takes on an invading horde of aliens in the noir-themed town of Little Fish City. The USP here though is the fact that everything is rendered in black and white except the invading aliens. This certainly makes the game and its enemies stand out quite a bit, but it may also wash out certain details and environments. Oh, I get that this is just the style the game is going for, and overall it works pretty well, but at times certain areas do get a bit too dark and or hard to distinguish, which may partially be due to my brightness settings, but this color palette certainly doesn't help. I mean, the aliens and their colors all pop out of the screen, so as interesting as this tone might be, it may also be a slight detriment. It doesn't usually interfere that much with the experience though, as the gameplay is pretty solid. In essence, you guide Timothy through Little Fish City while using your various weapons to deal with the alien menace. The controls are relatively standard fare, but unfortunately they may be a bit floaty and slippery. They usually work fine, but they do occasionally seem a tad imprecise. The camera is also slightly less than ideal. Okay, so it usually works flawlessly, but it does have a bit of a habit of turning into a minor hindrance as well. I mean, when you can actually fall off a level to your doom because you simply can't see the edges, I don't think that's entirely reasonable. Sure, I'm partially to blame here as well, but this camera could still use a few adjustments. At least Timothy is pretty good with a weapon though, as he's actually a fairly infamous gangster with a rather unique talent. You see, Timothy was once abducted by another group of aliens called activists and given the power of the Ace. Basically, this magic card allows him to slow down time and move at super speed, making him pretty adept at dodging bullets and the like. This power is also utilized in-game, although you can't use it for that long at a time. You can apparently increase the amount of Ace power available to you by finding some of those activists, but I only found one and he only gave me a bit more health. Sure, the aliens do drop balls that refill this meter and the base amount is technically enough, I just wish it lasted a bit longer per use. This isn't exactly your main tool though, as you also get a decent variety of weapons to play with. You may only start out with just a small pistol, but you will eventually be able to unlock and or purchase a Tommy gun, a shotgun and a revolver, all of which have their pros and cons. I do have to say though that, if anything, it is a bit too easy to acquire these guns and their ammo. As mentioned, you can purchase most of these weapons from this weird guy who set up shop in the sewer of all places. Thing is though that this city is literally littered with money, and on top of that, it all respawns whenever you re-enter an area or after you die. Basically, you'll very likely be able to afford almost everything the first time you visit this shop, which I don't think is quite right. I guess this just makes it slightly easier to deal with the aliens a bit earlier, but then again, that's not all that difficult to begin with. Don't get me wrong, it can occasionally be somewhat challenging to defeat the aliens, but it usually feels like that has more to do with the quantity of enemies and or the confined spaces you may have to fight them in. In fact, these aliens can actually get a bit annoying. You see, the aliens mostly pop up at fairly random points and they constantly respawn. Most of the time you can choose to run away from them if you want, but if you decide to take them on, it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed as well. It certainly doesn't help that you won't necessarily see or hear enemies creep up on you from behind before it's too late, which only causes more frustration. Weirdly though, it also feels like there's a lack of enemies at times. Yeah, I don't really know how to explain this, but even though it feels like you run into aliens all the time, it also feels like there aren't nearly enough of them. I mean, you can go for pretty long stretches not encountering a single foe, and while you do have other things to keep you busy, it just feels like something is missing. Maybe this has something to do with the fact that there aren't exactly a massive variety of enemies. Sure, this is somewhat expected, what with this being a pretty small indie game and all, but when you can literally count all the enemy types on one hand, that's not all that great, is it? Hell, 2 of them are really just color swaps as well, so no, I don't think a few more enemies would have hurt. I also think the larger enemies are the least troublesome. Sure, they can cause more damage, but the smaller minions are actually far more annoying. They just seem to bunch up on you rather quickly, and that weird little jump attack they have is far more challenging to avoid than you might think. Or they can still be dealt with easily enough, but yeah, there is a bit of a balance issue here. You could potentially use a car to get around this city though, but I honestly have no idea why this mechanic is included. Okay, so it is used for one mission, but walking and running is just as convenient and efficient, if not more so, and the car controls are downright awful. No, they're not broken as such, but they're just so sluggish and stiff, they just don't feel right. The music is also a bit lacking. I certainly wouldn't say it's awful, and I again understand that this is a relatively small project, but as there is only about 3 or 4 tracks and at least one of them is a public domain tune, it almost goes without saying that they will start to grate on you after a while. Again, this isn't terrible music, just a bit too bland and repetitious, at least for my tastes. It's not like you're necessarily going to experience any of this for all that long though, as this isn't exactly a massive game. I myself completed it in just over 3 hours, and I didn't exactly rush through it either. Fair enough, I didn't bother collecting or finding everything, but then that is completely optional and it won't change or unlock anything, at least not from what I understand. All that said, this is a rather small low-budget game sold for roughly $20 US or so, but I'm not completely sure that makes it a worthwhile purchase. I did have fun with it, yes, but that fun didn't really last that long, and it's not like the game is without flaws. The story and setting isn't really anything all that enthralling or fun either, decent though it may be. I certainly wouldn't say I feel ripped off though, but I still feel like the current price point is just a teeniest bit too high for what you're getting. I mean, you can get much bigger and more fleshed out games for around the same price, or at least not that much more, so I don't think this is quite good enough. I don't think they should just give it away, no, but this just seems a bit steep. Ultimately, this game has a decent enough concept and the execution is pretty good, but it's far from flawless and I don't think it really gives you your money's worth. It just feels like more of a proof of concept than a fully fledged game, and while it shows promise, it's just not quite there yet. Wildsphere seems like a good team, but as is, I just can't justify recommending Timothy vs. the Aliens.